simply by converting natural habitats into cultural habitats, we lose a lot of biodiversity. Another important factor is the intensity of use of the land. So how much agrochemicals, fertilizer we use, how many rotations we do, all that also affects biodiversity through different mechanisms. In Clever, we look at the effects of biodiversity from the trade in so-called non-food biomass commodities. This includes forest products, it includes soybeans, for example, that are used as animal feed, or other crops that are being transformed into bioenergy. And these crops are sometimes not so visible for consumers, but they make up for a large share of the internationally traded bio-based commodities. So in Clever we try to understand, better measure the effects of the production and conversion activities around those commodities on biodiversity. And we're trying to understand which kind of policy instruments can be used or combined to reduce the effects of trade in these commodities on biodiversity. The EUDR is a policy that was designed based on the insight that Europe is importing a number of products with a high deforestation footprint. And the idea was that if we impose a rule that products that have a positive deforestation footprint cannot be imported into the EU, then traders, all actors along the value chains are going to try to reduce the footprint. And they will. The question is, will that result in less deforestation, or will it just result in us importing products from places around the world where deforestation is not happening anymore when soybeans or forest products are produced, forest plantations or places that have been deforested many, many years ago. And for us to understand whether that happens, we have to study how traders behave, what drives them to buy products in one or the other place, how easily they can shift from one place to the other place. And that will help us to better understand whether the regulation has an impact. Our expectation is that it works well in places where Europe has a large share of the market. Think of cocoa production in Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana, for example. But it will not work so well in places where Europe has a small market share, like for soy in South America. Policymakers have to design and implement policies that provide the right incentives for sustainable production. That includes effectively enforcing policies in forest landscapes. Often these places have good policies, but they are poorly enforced. In many countries, one reason is that there's not enough money or infrastructure, physical infrastructure for effective enforcement. These countries need support. So it's sort of enforcing the rules, but then sometimes people also, or countries, need incentives. And then the question is, where does the money come from? Global trade generates huge values, and one way of raising money to reduce the negative impacts of global trade could be by taxing global trade. We do that in some places. In Europe we have a mechanism that is called the border tax adjustment, or we will have such a mechanism, and that is one way to cipher off some of the trade revenue and invest it properly in the places where environmental impacts occur. Consumers can act by making better and more sustainable choices. We know more and more by science and by what we read in the newspapers about how our consumption decisions affect the environment. So by moving to more sustainable diets, healthy but also sustainable diets, for example, reducing the amount of meat we eat, because meat tends to have a high carbon footprint, that could already help to sort of reduce the pressure on the environment. And lastly, companies, businesses, traders along the value chain can also use that transparency information to make right choices and negotiate deals in which producers have to comply with their own country's legislation, such that products that get on the market are produced sustainably.